Again, welcome to Training Tuesday. Today we are going to dive into our updates and reminders. We're going to talk about small purchases with emergency conditions, and we're going to talk about emergencies. We're also going to talk about late execution waivers. We'll tell you where you can find some additional training opportunities, and we'll talk about our Tuesday takeaway. Our updates and reminders. CPO Notice 2025.05 was recently issued and requires agency heads to sign and return the Agency Consultation for Supply Contracts form to the SPO by January 31st. Please note that if your agency provides a blanket approval, there is limited to no additional work required of the agency. The requesting agency, UP team, and SPO will bear the responsibilities of the new contract. Again, those were due on January 31st, so we're already in the week after. So please get those turned in as soon as possible. CPO Notice 2025.04, the State of Illinois Diversity and Inclusion in Procurement Training. That CPO notice was issued in December. The training window was from December 2nd through January 31st, 2025. Our office is currently reviewing for compliance with the notice. If your agency has a bid by user who did not complete the training, your agency will be notified and given 1 week for the training to be completed. If the bid by user does not complete the training within that week, they will be removed from bid by. To gain access to bid by again, they will be required to take the training prior to registration being approved. The training will remain open on OneNet for new hires and evaluators that require the training in the future. Please reference CPO Notice 2025.04 for additional information on how to access this training on OneNet. If you have questions about the notice, please direct them to your SPO. All right, let's dive into small purchase with emergency conditions and emergency procurements. The Illinois Procurement Code identifies 6 procurement methods, with emergency purchases being one of those. 30 ILCS 500-20-30 provides that agencies may make emergency procurements without competitive sealed bidding when one of the following occurs: a threat to public health or public safety, immediate expenditure is needed for repairs to state property in order to protect against further loss or damage to state property, prevent or minimize serious disruption in critical state services that affect health, safety, or collection of substantial state revenues, or to ensure the integrity of state records. In addition to the reasons for an emergency that we just covered, a quick purchase falls under the emergency section of the code and rules. The reasons for a quick purchase include protect the health and safety of any person, items are available on a spot market or at discounted prices for a limited time, so that good business judgment mandates a quick purchase immediately to take advantage of the availability and price. Rare items such as articles of historic value or art collections that are available for a limited time. The opportunity to obtain entertainment, speakers, and athletic or other events or performances is available for a limited time. And immediate action is necessary to avoid lapsing or loss of federal or donated funds. You would still need to use the emergency job aid for bid buy, since this is a type of emergency. As I stated earlier, the Procurement Code identifies 6 procurement methods. Emergency is one of those 6, and small purchase is another. Small purchases with emergency conditions are frequently confused with emergency procurements. A small purchase with emergency conditions is really just a small purchase. By code, we don't see this condition made available to us. However, when Ellen became the CPO for General Services, she noted how long the small purchase process was taking. She issued CPO Notice 2018.10 to address the timelines associated with small purchases that have sole source or emergency conditions. CPO Notice 2018.10 was recently rescinded and replaced with CPO Notice 2024.10, which we covered on a February 27th Training Tuesday. When talking about small purchases with emergency conditions, it is very important to refer to them as small purchases with emergency conditions. If you're trying to discuss a procurement with your APO or SPO, please make sure to use the wording small purchase with emergency conditions. If you just state emergency, then the procurement professional's mind should go directly to the procurement code emergency, which is above the small purchase threshold and will change the instructions on how to process the procurement. Please make sure to use the small purchase job aid for bid buy when you are completing a small purchase with emergency conditions. Small purchases with emergency conditions require contract execution prior to services or commodities being received. If the vendor begins work prior to the contract being executed, then a late execution waiver would have to be requested. If a contract is signed prior to SPO approval, then it would be a violation of Section 10-10 of the Procurement Code, and the agency would have to seek a ratification from the CPO. So please make sure that you gain SPO approval prior to executing a contract, and you need to make sure that the contract is executed prior to any work beginning for a small purchase with emergency conditions. Small purchases with emergency conditions are not limited to 90 calendar days since it is a small purchase and going by the rules and process of a small purchase. Please note, though, that if you declare an emergency for a procurement that could have been deemed a small purchase with emergency conditions, you must follow all rules and code requirements for emergency procurements. These would include publication requirements and filing with other entities such as the Auditor General, PPB, and CEI. If you are completing a small purchase with emergency conditions, you will need to complete the small purchase with special conditions form. You will select the special condition type as emergency conditions and then continue to fill out the prompts. The answers to the questions should provide a clear understanding of the emergency condition. Let's go back now into emergency procurements per the Illinois Procurement Code. They are defined under 30 ILCS 500-20-30 in the rules in section 1.2030, CPO notices 2014.06, 2022.07, and 2023.10 all pertain to emergencies. Emergency procurements are limited to a 90-day initial term. As much competition as possible, and shall use best efforts to include contractors certified under the Business Enterprise Program in the agency's emergency procurement process. When an agency declares an emergency, the agency must publish the public notice on bid buy using the emergency purchase statement. The statement provides the details of the emergency, and the agency will need to document if the cost is actual or estimated. Actual cost means that the value of the emergency is firm. Only one emergency statement will be required. An estimated cost. The value of the emergency is not fully known. The agency will need to select estimated and will be required to publish an actual cost statement once the final invoice has been received. If the agency has an emergency that will not be completed within the initial 90 days, the agency may seek an emergency extension. An emergency extension requires a detailed explanation of the need for an extension. It must be signed by the APO prior to submitting for CPO review. It must be approved by the CPO. If approved, the contract amendment must be approved by the SPO for execution and executed by the agency prior to the last day of the current contract ending. Otherwise, you can't extend something that the end date has already passed. When the actual total cost is determined, it shall also be published in like manner before the 10th day following the next succeeding month. This is the final cost statement and is inclusive of any extensions. You can find all details regarding how to publish the final cost in our job aid. If you want to know when it's required or read up more on that, you can look at the code 30 ILCS 520-30B. Please note that if an agency declares an emergency, it requires publication within 5 calendar days of declaration of the emergency, notice within 10 calendar days to PPB, CEI, and Auditor General. The Auditor General receives notice via email. The email must be included in the procurement file. Emergency extension publication within 7 calendar days after the extension is executed. Overall, we need to remember that when we discuss emergency procurements, we need to correctly identify what the intent is. Are you using a small purchase with emergency conditions, or are you issuing an emergency as defined by the code? Making sure that you communicate early with your SPO in regards to either is important to assure that LEWs are not needed for small purchases with emergency conditions, and that all required timeline requirements are met for emergencies. I have a few bid buy reminders as well. So double check your type code in bid buy. It helps with the reporting and the interface to the PPB clearinghouse. Do not use emergency as the type code when it's a small purchase with emergency conditions, because again, the type code would be small purchase. Small purchase with emergency conditions must still meet one of the 4 conditions of an emergency. No job aid specifically for the small purchase with emergency condition, but there are notes on the small purchase job aid. Now let's talk about late execution waivers. So what happens when services or goods have been received prior to execution of the contract? First, alert your APO and SPO. You'll need to obtain approval to execute the contract, and you'll need to execute the contract as quickly as possible. Once the contract is executed, the agency fills out and submits the late execution waiver attestation of facts and the LEW approval CPO version to the SPO. CPO Notice 2020.04 defines how agencies are to submit late execution waiver requests. The CPO Notice defines that the file must be submitted electronically and include the late execution waiver request, the late execution attestation of facts, and the executed contract and all required attachments. CPO Notice 2023.02 provided a revised late execution attestation of facts form that is required to be used. It is titled LEW Approval CPO version in our CPO resources. The LEW Approval CPO version is one of the forms that must be completed by the agency. It must have all the text boxes completed in full to provide the pertinent details regarding the contract, agency, and vendor information. The waiver then states, I approve an exception to the requirements of 30 ILCS 520-D for the obligation referenced above. The contract could not be reduced to writing and signed by all necessary parties prior to the goods being received or prior to the services being commenced because, and then leaves a text box for the agency to complete. Per CPO Notice 2020.04, the agency shall write "See attached" in the box and no other information. The details of what led to the late execution waiver or the late execution must be presented in the LEW attestation of facts form. This form must be completed in full. Assured detailed responses are provided. The attestation must be made by the APO or CFO. The attestation must be signed by the APO or CFO. As a reminder to CPO Notice 2020.04, the agency must submit a full packet to the SPO for review. That packet must include the late execution waiver approval form signed by the APO or CFO, the signed LEW attestation of facts, and the executed contract with all contract attachments. Please recall that U-plans, financial disclosures, and any other documents referenced in the contract are part of the contract and must be part of that contract file submitted. A few reminders for late execution waivers. LEWs are required when work started prior to contract execution, except for emergency procurements. The contract must still be approved and bid by the SPO prior to contract execution by the agency. Executing a contract prior to SPO written approval would violate Section 10-10 of the Code. After the contract is executed, the full LEW packet signed by the APO or CFO must be submitted to the SPO. Complete this as soon as possible. Once you've realized that you've had supplies or services provided prior to contract execution, get that into contract, get the contract approved, get your contract executed, and fill out your late execution waiver information and get that all the packet submitted as soon as possible. Make sure to visit our CPOGS Training Center for more training opportunities. You can find Bid Buy training, where we have on-demand training videos. We host Bid Buy office hours every Wednesday at 9 a.m. And we have our diversity and inclusion in procurement training that must be taken in order to even access Bid Buy. CPOGS Training Academy, we currently have 3 courses that you can take: our Introduction to Illinois Procurement, Procurement Methods, Small Purchases, and Specifications. We can't wait to see you attend those. Interesting Illinois. So phone booths have become difficult to find, but if you're in downtown Lincoln, just look up. On the roof of City Hall, you'll see a phone booth that was originally installed in the 1960s to provide a lookout for severe weather spotters. It was used as an early tool by the Lincoln Fire Department. The youngest and single firefighter would report to the phone booth with a radio or, at the time, a direct hardwire phone line connected to the desk downstairs. If severe weather, such as wall clouds, funnel clouds, or tornadoes were spotted, the firefighter would call downstairs and have the storm siren activated. The siren that was attached to the booth was removed in 2009 when it was no longer serviceable. The phone booth was supposed to be removed then as well, but the community spoke up to preserve this unique oddity atop the historical building. Although there have been several requests, the phone booth is not open to the public. Thank you all so much for attending our training Tuesday. If you have any questions, you can send those over to cpogs.training@illinois.gov. Thank you all.